Welcome, Mind, Body, Spirit community. I'm Courtney Riley. I'm one of the hosts of the Mind, Body, Spirit Summit. And today we're super lucky to have Susan Lipshutz with us. She is a licensed clinical social worker. Susan is a sacred feminine activist with more than 30 years of experience teaching and practicing integrative psychotherapy. She's devoted to building strong communities that reawaken and integrate the divine feminine into daily life. Susan also combines the ancient wisdom of our grandmothers with her own powerful teachings attuned to the complexities of modern life, and such things as moon cycles and astrology and Akashic records and so much more. She's also the founder of Everyday Medicine Woman, offering workshops, meditation courses, and retreats around the world. And we are so blessed to have you here today, Susan. You are a mentor of mine and have brought so much wisdom to my world and my life. And anytime I talk with you, it's this beautiful remembrance and calling to step into my own power and to be aware that there is this whole faculty, I'll say, of support in this around me, from my ancestors to guides to angels, and you're just such a beacon of light for keeping me aware that that's available. So I'm so stoked for you to be talking to this community today. And I'd love because you could I know you could talk about so many different subjects. So community, we actually chose a topic in order to hone. And today's topic is women empowerment and the moon. And so as we begin, Susan, I'd love for you to talk about the sacred history of aligning with the moon in cultures, traditions, whichever way you want to go with that.
Sure. Thank you so much. I just feeling so much love for you and from you and for everyone listening. And it makes me so happy that our experience together has this opportunity to help you feel that sense. I think that's part of empowerment, is when we know we're not alone, when we have that sense of, we have our own back, but not from a survival kind of disconnected way, but more of a sense of being woven in. And that is very much, again, when we talk about the feminine, that idea of the weaver. In most cultures, the weaver is the feminine, the spider woman of creating this beautiful kind of, web of life, all of those intergenerational and cycles and all those things. So it just makes me happy that you feel that way, because that's my hope, that we all can get reconnected to what is maybe we've been disconnected from, but we can begin to reweave into. So thank you very much. And every topic that we talk about with this, it is good to keep a short leash on me, because I can go on and on, But regarding the notion of the sacred history around moon cycle, moon practices, and the benefits and the importance of that, I think what's got disconnected for us is, if we look kind of farther back and we look at what orients us now, it's a calendar where we're counting the days as it relates to all around the sun, which is a stationary force in our solar system that we all rotate around, that has more, for lack of a better word, a masculine presence. It's force, it's yang, it's movement. It empowers us in that way that we think of, meaning there's movement to it when we're connected to it. But we look at it and it's a stationary kind of relationship. But really before we had that particular calendar, when we look at all the calendars, when we look at the Celtic calendar, if we look at the Kabbalah or the Hebrew calendar, when we look at Tibetan, every other kind of calendar, the Mayan, it all references the Ayurvedic. It's all connected to the moon, with the new moon starting each cycle. Because when we were living more connected to the land, we were also connected to growing cycles, which is what kept us going, nature cycles, and we were connected to the seasons. We were connected to, that's why, the idea even of the equinoxes and the solstices, they were launch points where we moved from season to season, and we honored, many people who work with, particularly like 5 elemental Chinese medicine will talk about that. So when we talk about the seasons and we talk about the calendar in a different way, we're feeling into the calendar relative to what is nature asking of us, and how, as part of nature, do we adjust and allow that to evolve and move forward. So that notion of relating to the moon, particularly for women, is that if we're not, this isn't about, we get really caught up in perfection in our culture, what's right, what's wrong, what's better, what's worse. But it's really more of an organic kind of connection that when our cycle, so when we're menstruating, when we're on our cycle, the when we start it, we're actually starting a new cycle, right? Like when people say count your cycle, it's like, okay, when I got my period. So we're starting the cycle then in those first, that little bit actually right before, right around there, we're cleansing. The body's cleansing itself. The body is releasing. The body's doing a detox. The body's preparing for a new growth cycle, for whatever language we want to use with that. We move up to the fullness of that when we're having our ovulation, and then we, release, so to speak, and then we move towards that notion of, starting all over again. That's like a very generalistic way. But when you think about that, that is not only a growth cycle, monthly, but that's our whole life in a way. We could see our whole life cycle, particularly our adult life cycle as women, through one moon cycle, which I'll get into more a little later. Yeah. So in ancient culture, there was a sense of a relationship to an ancestral understanding or a wisdom tradition that when you were connected in your rite of passage, when you were growing up as a little girl, but then more particularly once you had your first, what they would call as moon, or when you had your first menstrual cycle, you would learn about these sacred practices that when you aligned with the moon, when you honored your cycle, when you connected as being a daughter of the earth, so to speak, and you started to feel the power of your bleeding, the power of your menstruation, and then aligning with it and leaning into it and flowing with it. So many metaphors we can use, that there is a sense of being woven to something before us and something that we move forward. And then it also allows us to follow that into how the life cycle continues for us as women. Historically, we would call it, like if we look at ancient culture, maiden, mother, crone, or we look at the archetypal language about that. As contemporary women, we know that if we don't choose to have a child or it doesn't happen for us, doesn't mean we're maidens until we're, go through menopause, nor does it mean that we're trapped in one particular area. And there's a lot, doesn't mean we go from one exclusively to something that was also culturally norms. That's the other thing with when we look at sacred history teachings, it's also defined by culture and by norms that we outgrow and we evolutionize, which we're going through in our time now as women. So it's a dynamic kind of thing. So getting back to that sacred history, a lot of times as we've gotten more connected to a certain kind of calendar that's focused around being productive, showing up in the world, how do we rate our progress, right? So we have to kind of move out into the world, and we've lost because our mothers, our grandmothers, they were really, there was a different reference point on how to assimilate into a culture that we were in and how to teach what was considered to be valued. And so what started to happen is those sacred teachings that were unique to each culture or unique to each ethnicity, but they had a relationship to go talk to your grandmother and she has some things to share with you, whether it's natural herbs or it's, ways to connect with, it's ways to take the girls in and talk with them. That really got marginalized and even erased, and certainly erased historically. So what we found is that as most of us started to get awakened, and I think all the audience here, like all of our community here that we're talking with, we have a curiosity. Some people listening are way ahead of me in this, and they're already very involved in their own understanding of their health, their wellness, their power, their sacredness, their magic, all of that as it relates to the sacred feminine. But I think that for many of us, we get part of our awakening is what is the most natural, what is completely around us. So, but when you start to lift the lid, you really see it. And one place you see it a lot is in astrology, because in astrology, every single, sign and every single planet and asteroid, particularly the asteroids, are all elements of the feminine and feminine story. So it's absolutely fascinating when you start to look at that and you go, oh, this is really kind of beautiful how from a cosmic level, or as above, so below, it's telling us and speaking to us about our journey and our journey in the feminine. And then as it relates also, one of the commonalities is the relationship to the moon. So the moon becomes this reference point. Every planet has a moon, more than one, some of them. Yeah. But so in many indigenous cultures, they talk about the moon as being a grandmother energy, grandmother moon. So it's that sense of, you might have Mother Earth, like what do we come from? What feeds us every day? What is our daily experience with being cared for and supported and nurtured and nourished and taught in that way, literally giving us the ground that we walk on. But then we look at what guides us, what teaches us in a different way about our inheritance, what has a different kind of way that it speaks to us, and more of a, like I say, a magical kind of quality to it. And we would say the grandmother weaves us in at a different level. So I will see what that stimulates in you, and we can go from there.
So much, so
beautiful.
But yeah. In hearing you talk about just even the basic concept of like, oh wait, we do live by the sun now. We live so much by, like you were saying, how are we productive? This masculine energy. And a lot of women also disconnecting from their moon, and if anything, maybe even being ashamed of it, right?
Exactly.
Like being taught from an early age to, maybe handed a book and a tampon and put in the bathroom, that kind of thing with their moon cycles, versus it being this like coming into being ritualized and celebrated as a woman, and having that community of other women that you talk to about it. And it's been really recent for me with having a baby where, wow, I'm really relying on my other female friends who have children, and the grandmas and different women who have all this insight and wisdom. But it's like, I got initiated in a way into this new world. Mm-hmm. But that's not necessarily something that I feel like our culture, I had to reach out for it, some people reached to me, which was beautiful. But I'm also thinking too about like our technological age and the fact that, it's maybe even, would you say this awakening's coming about because so many of us it's like the dark and the light, like there's this disconnection, even more and more and more, like connection towards the sun and away from the moon. So then there's this resurgence happening right now of the moon, would you say?
Yes. And it's, again, I have a skewed reference point. So, who do I follow on Instagram, or what's on my radar, so to speak? Just because it's accessible, information is so much more accessible. Right. But what I do find is when I started doing this work for me and got awakened into my own spirit, and it actually for me happened through childbirth. So it was this whole, or very, very primal and very mystical kind of awakening that happened as I had literally was birthing my child. I was already studying that, but it wasn't academic anymore, or curious, like I'd get my cards read or whatever. But then I had this experience that was so altering for me in every single cell of my body, which was unexpected. It wasn't something, again, I planned for. I wasn't a baby person, but it was just something that came upon me, and I came to feel it. I think I told you this. I'll just say it really, really briefly, but I think I told you the story that I was in Mexico and I was nursing my child. Baby was like 9 months old. And I look across, I was on a street. It was just a dirt street because, it's nowhere to sit. And I look across and there's this woman who's an Indian woman, indigenous, and clearly, very poor. And she's nursing her baby. And our eyes lock and we go into this space, and I still get chills. Everything disappeared. And I got this, it sounds, I say it and it's like, it sounds very woo-woo, but I had this download that felt like thousands of years, everything separated us, but nothing separated us because we were two women and we were in this experience of this blessing and in this beautiful experience of the maternal and of the sacred feminine. It took me a long time to, let's say, interpret the download, but I knew my life had totally changed through that initiation. Yeah. Not only of that, and again, what I say much deeper and bigger in that is something that we already knew, something that we even know. I didn't know how to do these things, and I'm not saying it's easy. For all of us, it's part of our journey and our initiation. Yeah. So when we talk about what is power have to do with the moon? Power has to do with us reconnecting with a different way that we source our internal power that comes from love, that comes from life-giving, that comes from collaboration together, like you talked about community. There is something inside of us as women that has been so devalued, quite honestly, as a leadership model. So even as women in families, we've gotten so marginalized, and this isn't true anymore, honestly. I think we're out of it. But when I started even this, having my first child 32 years ago, when I was around the work that I was doing, even when I started to look for my spiritual teachers and work for a practice, everything was male-oriented, gurus and teachers, or androgynous. They were not women. And so as I kept hunting, and I was working, that's why I worked with indigenous practices, because women were in there, natural cycles were in there. I was looking for women's power. What was women's mystery? Not what was the masculine. And eventually I found them, but they were tending, llama herds in Peru. They weren't coming to the United States to teach us. They had things to do, right?
They were they're like, I'm still working. I'm doing, yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm feeding my family. But so, this sense of having to really find this, and seek out other ways to understand how leadership could be seen and viewed that didn't move us into that hyper-masculine sense, which is what, unfortunately, most of us as women. And I know when you talked about the shame and all of that with our moon cycles, the first thing we're taught is, and I think all of us had those experiences of our dreams where nightmares, like I'm on a stage and I'm bleeding and people can see it, and, or go to school and get teased by it and all those things. So it was try to manage hiding rather than embracing what we really needed to be doing is what did our body need during that time? How were we feeling during that time? How would we take care of ourselves? What would we understand that was going on for us that we could cultivate a sense of privacy rather than shame? And I think this connects to fertility, many, many years later, not only from a point of view of hormonal imbalances, but, this sense of not having a relationship to cultivate a sacred and deep understanding of ourselves and our rhythms and our sequencing and how to support that. So anyway, when this was going on for me then, it was a very different experience. And now you look on what's going on and there's a total boon. That's why I started 13 Moons 13 years ago. All of these things was a really concentrated experience to understand a different way to source our power, a different way to source who we were, an identity that had to do with our sacred feminine, our organic, our primal. And now women, because I think, for the large, it's a wave of a shift. We can see it astrologically in terms of trends and changes and what's going on, but we can also see by the amount of women that really got into this, 20 years ago, whatever, 30 years ago, that now there's a sense women are craving and women are going for it. They don't feel inhibited. Right. They talk to each other. They connect. They create community. There's just so much. It's just much, much different change. So I think, thank goodness, you see all the time now, like goddess circles and women empowerment is not only consciousness raising, although we have to get back to that, like recently with the Me Too movement and having to stand our ground and be strong in what we say and activate our voice. That's another form of our power, is collaborating in numbers together, breaking down the myths of what we kept in secrecy that we bring forward. But some of this has to do with us not only connecting to a disharmony with what's going on and then a need to step forward, but also, a sense of a greater kind of central process. And I think one of the ways that we can transform our regular life cycle into a sacred rite of passage all comes by us connecting with the moon and starting to learn from the moon. And what happened for me, for example, is as I was learning all these things, I went to see a Chinese medicine doctor, and it was a woman, and she said to me, "When did you start your moon time?" And I didn't even know it. I was trying to act real cool about it, but I'm thinking moon time, and I was like, that was the menstrual cycle, and it was like, oh my God, my moon time! Like, this is so romantic. This is so mystical. It's so beautiful, to claim that is my moon time. And what does it mean to start to track and chart from the point of view that I cycle just like the moon? But it's not always easy flowing, all this light. Just like you said, there is also the dark moon. The moon, like when we go towards PMS, for example, there's a truth that happens when our estrogen drops, right? Everything gets raw, but we really see things as they are. And again, in medicine traditions, there was a time where right before you got your menstrual cycle, in that rawness, you really saw, without all of the rose-colored glasses and the oxytocin and all that good stuff, you saw the truth. You saw the rawness. And when you were going into your cycle, you were going into the dark. You were dissolving. You were learning about death and rebirth. And that's why the dark goddesses, we would talk about it. They're not to be feared. It's not negative. It's just there are times in our life where things are difficult, where we grieve, where we need to be in, we need to see things as they are. We need to make decisions out of that. We need to let some things go. And so the moon cycles, the light and the dark, teaches us the ability as women to be in our totality, right? The moon is always whole, always full, but it makes us through the different angles so that we get to understand and explore all the angles of ourselves. So the power becomes the ability in a very full way to understand the completeness of who we are and when to push, like birth, when to relax, when to surrender, when to align, when to let it be. So it's amazing.
And trusting in that cycle. And what I'm really hearing too is this like harnessing of power from that feminine aspect, and that actually learning as women and even as men what feminine power looks like versus we're pretty versed in what masculine power looks like. And I think for a long time power was just looked at as power, and in order to be powerful it looked this way, where it's actually like, no, there's so many different heads of the gods and the goddesses, and how power comes, and if you're looking at the cycles and how you can cycle through your month, whether your personal cycle's in line with the moon or not, you have your own internal moon cycle, and then there's also the moon cycle of the external. And I mean, do you notice that people, as they get more in tune, they do align with that more? Like their cycle and the moon cycle gets in line?
Well, there's that whole thing of when women go to summer camp or when women go to college or anything, or sororities or whatever, they're going like, oh, we're all having our cycle at the same time. There's something mystically power. How does that happen? Is that a coincidence? There's scientific studies. They could talk about like pheromones and all that stuff. But I'd love to leave it as it's in mystery, but it happens. Yeah. So many women will find, if they're not on taking, birth control, that they will often cycle with either the new moon or the full moon. And again, one might say, ideally, if we're bleeding on the new moon and start our cycles then, that might feel a little bit more organic. But again, we're natural beings, and whenever it happens is fine. I think that allows for a way in which we can kind of gently, without over-programming ourselves, have an awareness of tracking both cycles. So in other words, we could say, okay, this is when I started my moon this month, and what's going on in the actual moon. So is that a waxing moon when we're having that kind of thing? There's easy ways I can talk about. We can do that. Actually, there's apps now. There's apps just to follow not only your fertility, but your moon cycles and connect with that. It's like we're all, we're all aligned now for all these different kinds. Yes, it's definitely evolving. But so we can get a sense of our rhythm and harmony. What we don't want to do is get this type A perfectionistic, like, oh, I'm learning about the moon now, body. We get annoyed with body, right? Like when body doesn't get, produce a baby, or body's, bleeding on a day we have a big talk or a big, presentation, or that sense of now I want to, I'm supposed to be cycling when the moon is new or something. Like, no. It's just more than anything, it's kind of noticing, what's going on with the moon and how am I feeling? So that's another thing, that's just like opening up to the curiosity. Yeah. So for example, when you just start tracking, what am I feeling today? Where's the moon? And so when you start to look and you go, oh, the moon just changed signs. Like it went from, for example, I think we're in a Capricorn moon today, which is much more kind of grounded and focused and would be a great kind of process. We'd be more, a little bit more interested in how can we bring a legacy forward with this summit. How can we be really as broad-based in the historical references and how we can give to everyone and be, thoughtful in that way. But it just kind of, we get a sense of why is our mood changing, or the feeling of the day, because the moon, is the quickest cycling planet up in the sky. So the moon changes every 2.5 days. And then when the moon, if we want to get really esoteric, our moon sign, like from our astrology, when we get our natal chart, and we notice our natal moon on the day that the moon is that same thing. We align with that and kind of see what that feels like and so forth. But it's more just to start to get into a sense of, am I noticing intuitively? So it does also enhance our intuition in those ways as well, because we're intuiting, what am I noticing about my emotional state? Moon governs emotions, waters, all those things. We're 70% water, all of that. So we can start moving in that way as well. So yeah, a lot of women will notice that they're more of an awareness of what's going on in their emotional body, what's going on around them, what their needs are. They might need on a little bit more boundary, and it's like, why is that? And it's either because their internal cycle's going a certain way, or it might be because the moon's in Pisces and everybody's feeling less boundary and more kind of psychically available, and that can be overwhelming if you're sitting in a room with 2,000 people or something, or you're taking L's all day. So it has a value to it, not only a mystical sort of, a metaphysical value to it, but it also has like a value in understanding self-care.
So if it's like, so someone can start, like how can someone start? They can start first with pen and paper and simply tracking their own moon cycle, but then also pen and paper and tracking what's going on in the sky. Can you talk a little bit about each phase of the moon and what?
Yeah, sure. There's, the four biggest phases of the moon are the new moon, the first quarter waxing moon, the full moon, and then the third quarter or the half waning moon. So those are like 4 quadrants. And so if we look at those 4 quadrants, the new moon, like as I say, as the summit's going on, I think we're going to be, like right now as we're talking, that it will be in a beginning of a waxing phase, because May 15th is a new moon. And so around from the 18th to the 21st, around that window, we'll be moving up into the first half moon. So from the point of view of learning, educating, connecting, turning on, getting started, something new that we're all, everyone is connecting with, they're going to feel really good about it, because after the new moon, it starts to power up. It starts to grow something. If we think of new to fruition, a growth cycle, the moon is always going with that. So it's building and then it's releasing. So from the point of view of the first quarter moon, the new moon starts that new cycle, and then we're starting something new. It's like we're planting seeds. So the day before the new moon is called the balsamic moon, and that's like the absolute dark, where it's the greatest time to just let everything go and prepare for this new. And so it's a great time energetically too to say, oh, this is what I'm done with for the month, and I really want to let this negative energy or this fight with someone or whatever it is. But anyway, so we start on the new moon. We start with the new moon ritual could simply be a meditation where we're being thoughtful about, I'm planting something new in the soil of the celestial, in the soil of my being, a rich, beautiful soil. What is that seed, or what is it that I would love to see grow in my life this month? And we can even, if we notice and we start to connect in, there's sometimes where there's like seasonal changes. This will be at May 15th, which is really deep into spring. Like we're fully into that spring season. But when we're in certain kind of growth modes, and spring, nothing more is growth promoting than spring. We also want to think about, in the fall is when we harvest. So we think about these seeds are even more super seeds, because what are we planting that we want to grow? And we don't want a harvest of anger. So, we don't want a harvest of disappointment. So we want to be really clear on, what do we want to really not grow only on the external, but on the internal. So as we start that, then we notice and feel like if we work with that new moon, and no matter where our moon is, men or women, we align with that new moon, plant those, and then we start to cultivate them. We water them every day. So we want to just, as we do our meditations daily, or daily breath practices, or we connect with a crystal that we really love, or a rock that we found out in our garden, and we just hold it, and it's got that energy in it. And then every day we just we're imagining that we're checking it out, we're pulling out the weeds, we're connecting with it, we're really tending to our internal garden of the seed we're growing. So we're building those. So the half moon is saying, okay, the first quarter moon, then things start to ramp up more. So the first quarter moon is when we move from just tending to something that we want to grow and learning about it, and then it starts to actually have a force, because it's got a root system it's starting to develop, and then it's got this primal force where the earth and sort of the momentum of what we've started to create starts to build. So that first quarter moon is that moment. So we see what's going on in the first half moon. We look up in the sky and we can see that half moon, or that emoji we use, at that half moon. And then it starts to build to, that's when the buds come up from the earth, So you can kind of think it can be an agitating time, because think about if you were actually the bulb pushing your way out or birth, it would be, intense, because there's something that really now has a force to bring it forth. So when you're starting a new project, or you think about that, you don't necessarily have to start it on the new moon literally, although you can, but you can also think, if I was kind of aligning with that momentum, what would that look and feel like? And then the half moon, when we think of the full moon, everything's up to the surface. Everything can be seen. So that's why people have that really kind of frenetic, it can be, or that wilding, because everything, it would be like a tree that's in blossom. Everything is the rewilding, like everything's kind of coming out. The fertility is out there. So May 15th, right? What's Beltane and the new moon and all that. That sense of the dance of spring. And all of that sensuality and everything. So our sexuality, our sensuality, that sense of it all kind of comes forward. But there can also be an out of control feeling if there's emotions that are really strong that we don't feel in balance with. But that is like the peaking of the cycle. So it's a great time when we connect with those ways in terms of fertility. And it aligns with that notion of if we are bleeding and we start on our new moon, and then if we're at the full moon point, you think of that ideally as like 14 days, right? That's like we've been ovulating. So at the really profound state is right after the full moon. Even though there's release in the new moon, the releasing of what we've blossomed, like after a rose, it starts to release, like the seeds release. And then about 3-4 days after that, the petals come off. So that's when, in the waning moon, that other side is where we have our visions about what happened, our hindsight, the wisdom. So when we get that wisdom, we can see what we've been through. So that's a great time to start cultivating information. So let's just say we started a project, we were in it, like we're just sort of vibing with it, we're organic with it, we're pumped up by it, we're really feeling. So it is our power. We're moving in that powerful way. We feel it, we feel full in it, we've expressed it, and then we start to look at it and say, okay, so how'd the experiment go? What are we starting to notice? What could we have done differently? How did we use our energy? How did we hold back our energy? How did we, whatever it is we're assessing. Beautiful time. We have our wisdom state. And then we start to let it all go. We start to prepare. That's that time in the waning moon, from the half moon, moving in back to the new moon. That's that moment where we become, in a way, primal again, in the sense that all of this now wants to, everything that we've cultivated from a divine mind or a thoughtful mind or our emotional self, and then our organicity wants to start to let it go, eliminate it, kind of like our body. We eat something, we digest it, we use all the good stuff, and then we want to eliminate it. So we want to utilize that and just say, all right, so now we just want to be. And the whole notion of that story, that book, Everybody Loves the Red Tent, was a sense of preparing to go into, for the women, to just go in now and be cared for and, let everything go and have the visions for ourselves and our collective and start our cycle again. So that's like the whole, but if you really look at it, I just want to say really quickly one other way. So when we start our moon time as girls, we're at that new moon, and we start to move into maiden at the first quarter moon, right? I don't like to use the language because it kind of puts us in a language we might not be comfortable with, but basically we're young women. We're starting to develop. Our bodies starting to change. We're getting comfortable and uncomfortable with it, but we're getting the handle of it. We're starting to get our sensuality. We're being, flirtatious, all those things that we start to let ourselves find our own identity and sense of ourselves relative to the world. But then we start to move into wanting to take ownership, nurture, and nourish. So whether that's becoming a mother, whether we have a child or not, we then have this sense of giving of ourselves in a selfless way. Like whether it's to a project, whether it's to our work, whether it's to our relationships, there's just this sense of, I want to deeply be connected, giving and receiving in that sense. And we move into that notion of motherhood. So motherhood, that archetype, would be more the full moon. right? And we want to connect with all of that. That was the time I was probably the most fertile of my ambitious with putting all these medicine women's circles and doing goddess gatherings. All of that started when I was in my mother mode because I wanted to take care of everybody. The problem was I did it in my mother mode, so everybody saw me as a mother. But then I got totally exhausted by it because I wasn't realizing myself in it, losing that sacred teaching. But then when I started to move through, so then you go to the other side of that, right? And that's when you start to move into your wisdom years. So as you're moving in that, you start to disconnect from, remember, we release? Yeah. So the seeds of what we learned from motherhood are those sweet golden seeds of what we want to start to cultivate our mastery as women. We don't come into our power till we're older. So a lot of times women will feel like, I have to do everything now. No, it doesn't. I don't mean that even if it, particularly, I want to speak to the women out there, though. You can still be out in the world and do all kinds of productive things, but you're going to feel, I don't want to use the word distraction like a child is a distraction. I'm just saying your energy is, your focal point becomes radically changed. But when you start to, the oxytocin changes, the destabilization of, your estrogen and all that good stuff. So you start to have the focal point goes within again. And then you're moving into a real state of empowerment because you start to get clear that your voice, what you want to study and be a part of, what you want to share is not a process of you giving to everybody. It's a process of you sharing with everybody. It's a process of you having to go within and distill what is the essence of your teachings or whatever that's like. And then you become focused. Or for artists, many artists become most creative, really get a deep sense of what it is, the book writing. The creativity becomes very different because you're much clearer. The activism, the world mother is not the taking care of. Remember the moon? She sits off on the sideline and she resonates and teaches from that really different place. So something that gets dislodged in menopause, it's our most powerful rite of passage. And something needs in the pause of our life needs to be that is inside getting shifted. We need to express it externally. So all those things I did, like cultivating all this stuff that was in mother mode, it's like I had to tear apart a weaving I created. And it was primal and I was grieving it, but I knew my energy had to be released for something else. It was a time I felt very out of control. And many women feel out of control and we're not. But if we don't go through the full rite of passage, it's the closest thing we are to that masculine energy because we're really in that fire goddess mode, dark goddess, because it's very powerful. But out of it comes a whole different kind of ancestor, a different sense of eldership and a different kind of queen energy. So you see that whole life cycle. Yeah. And then when we get older, and we're getting ready to die, it teaches us about the death of the life cycle and really getting a sense of understanding and wholeness of the journey of our life. So if we look at the moon, it has so much richness of our entire journey, and it offers a sequence and a timing, a divine timing to who we are that lets us understand, don't rush. Everything happens as we're ready for it.
Well, and there's cycles inside of cycles inside of cycles is what I'm hearing too. So you have this whole lifespan cycle, you have a month cycle, but it sounds like you could have an annual cycle.
Right.
Yeah. So in some ways too, that someone could even begin to look at whatever level of cycles that feels empowering to them. Because if looking monthly feels too quick, maybe they could look at more an annual cycle.
I think relative to the moon, if you want to just get a sense of what does it feel like to be more connected and vibing and tuned into the moon, I would just say keep it simple, meaning look at the full moon and the new moon. And it's really easy. You can just Google, we have the brilliance of Google for all the difficulties of it. And it's just, Google moon phases and you'll immediately pop up, several primary sources. Or, if you just get on the mailing list for Mystic Mama, or if you look on my Facebook page or Instagram, things like that, there's a couple Astro Cafe, Shani Nicholas, a lot of women follow. And there's constant information about every time the moon's changing signs, but it's also kind of big information about half moons and full moons and new moons. And so you can just go, oh, that's cool. I'm reading that. How does that make me feel? Does that connect with me? Does it help me guide myself a little bit more? So I would say just get educated a little bit. And I don't mean educated in a judgmental kind of way. It's more like learn, but learning from the divine mind that organizes then into the body mind, into the body wisdom. And then but the other thing I would say is, if everybody wants to start, a really great place to start, and I'm just going to say this, and I know we want to like talk a little bit about like practices or kind of honing in. Don't go away from the magic, because I want everybody to think about, who's listening to this. What do you when's your first memory of when you saw the moon? The first time you saw the moon as a child. So a little girl, or if a man's listening, a little boy, like you looked up and you saw the moon. It's absolutely like, enchanting. It's breathtaking. It's mystical. It's magical. And sometimes it's not always, it can sometimes be scary. I remember I was in a car and it was like, the moon's following me, like the moon was always there. It was a little bit daunting, but the magic of the moon. And I know I hosted a retreat in Tulum about a month ago, and it was the full moon. And the moon, every time the moon came out, I swear, everybody, wherever they were, so there's like 80 people on the retreat site, they were all ran out. It was just like we're children again. We're like following the moon. We're enchanted. We're intoxicated by this moon. It's so beautiful, or like a moon will come out, like in our city life, right? It's really hard to see the moon. And then we're driving, and all of a sudden, I swear, it's just like I almost get into a car accident. It's like, oh, the moon. It just feels like this every single time. It's a reminder of magic, and that's such a beautiful experience. So if you even want to look at it, let's just say you don't want to follow moon cycles right away. Just maybe write a story, an archetypal story, like a magical story. Like, if I wrote about the moon, what is the moon? Let me write a story about the moon. Like like a fairy tale about the moon, or a little bit of a poem about the moon, or how the moon makes me feel, or, move through the magical, because it takes us into our mystical self. Our magical self, our intuitive self. There's so many doorways in this lunar compass awakens. And, through Ayurvedic and through yoga, right, there are nodes in our bodies as women that men don't have. What are they, 9 nodes or something? They're special. When we breathe with them, they awaken through the body. It's a very deep, sacred practice that is unique to the feminine. We do have the mystery teachings. We're connected. They say there's a little great mystery in our uterus, in our womb space, that men don't have. So it's immediate access into great mystery within. So, it's very powerful and very beautiful. So you might want to say, I want to just do it mystically. I don't want to get involved in all this, the cycles that get in my head. I really want to just feel it in my being and let it be more of a creative process in that way as well. So those are beautiful practices to just think about that first time when we were still magical little beings as children. Or if you're around children, watch what happens when they see the moon, and ask them, and just see it. And they'll get you all excited again about, how beautiful it really is. And that's the feminine, right? It is reflecting beauty. It is reflecting magic. It has no light of its own. So that's why, and it tells us about the dark and the light when it goes into the dark. Or when we can't find it, like it rises a little bit different every day. So you can't match your clock like the sun. Right. There's mystical to it. It's like it tricks us, It's like, oh, you're not the same place. What's up? So it is a creature that can't quietly be, quite.
It can look huge. It can look small. It can look red. It can look. And it's always unique in its own right that way too.
Exactly.
Yeah. Oh, it's so beautiful. I'd love for you to get a little bit into some of the practices, and I don't know if you wanted to offer a practice today, or if you wanted to just talk about practices people could do.
Well, I think we already got into a couple of them, which is to just start to track it.
Yeah.
Try it for a month, and I would say even try it when you get off our talk today, to just kind of Google it and see where's the moon. Like I say, it will be waxing, but you'll see because it's a new moon. In Taurus, and then you'll start to see where it's in. It may even be in Gemini when we're talking, which is conversational and all that good stuff.
What waxing and waning means?
Well, as I said, the waxing moon is the building up. It is the going towards the, the full moon, and the waning is releasing from.
Perfect. Yeah.
So it's that kind of energy. It's getting stronger, and then it's weakening. Yeah. But weakening doesn't mean something bad. It means it's the light is weakening. And in that way, we start to go into dark. And we learn different things about the dark, right? And so that's beautiful as well. It's quieter. It's a different kind of time. So I would say that's one way, is to chart if you are a woman, if you are a woman who's menstruating. If you're not, like if you have had a surgical intervention in terms of your moon cycle, or you're already in what we call moon pause, although my favorite word for that is regenopause, which I really love. You can just honor your moon cycle by even using, if you wanted to use something that was like cranberry juice, just like, your blood or something, and just offer it to the earth or something like that. But you just start your start time, and you honor the new moon, and whatever that means to you. You might, even if you like crystals or you like stones, you could even create a little altar for the feminine, altar for the moon. It's really beautiful with the four objects that relate to you to be the waxing, the waning, the new, and the full, and track and chart that. Hold each stone for that particular time, and then put it down. And if you have blessings for the month or things you're working on, you can write it down, or statues that we like, things like that. Another reason to go sacred shopping, right? It's always fun. You can meet together with your friends who are like-hearted, and as women, and start to put together circles, which a lot of women are doing. Instead of book clubs, they're doing circles where they're doing meditations together, and each woman will rotate leading the meditation or bringing something in, or different. It's inconvenient, and I've noticed this to be too, in the sense that we're also scheduled, and that is our reality, that it's hard to go, okay, we're meeting on the new moon and the full moon. But I do know women who are incredible at being able to say, yeah, that's our calendar for the month, and if it's a Wednesday night, and then it's a Friday night, and then it's a Sunday night, we do it, because that's the night that it really happens on. And we get together, and we talk, and we share, and it's not a time where we give and receive advice. It's a time where we're witnessing each other, and we do some sorts of meditations, or again, whether it's planting, growing, releasing, grieving, whatever it might be. We can call on each other for sacred rites of passage around those times too. Those are in the big sense. But for ourselves, I would say, get started with noticing the moon. Get started with some way to track the actual moon cycles and your own cycle, if you are, even if you're not, again, interested or want to relate it to your own bleeding cycle. You still can have a moon cycle connecting with the new moon and the full moon and that sort of thing. So that's one way. And then the inner moon, I would say, just right now, if you want to take a breath and close your eyes, and let's just do a little attunement to the moon. So imagining with our eyes closed that as we're breathing, we're feeling into the body. And we're kind of feeling like a natural place we might want to invite would be, maybe start by breathing into where we call our third eye, between our eyebrows. And imagine we start to breathe in there. And then we start to let the breath move down in, naturalistically, all the way down into our womb or womb space. So like our mid-pelvic region, because that's where our ovaries, if we're women listening, our womb space, and so that's an open space for us to cultivate this. So as we're breathing in, like almost like from the sky, and we're breathing down into our womb or womb space. And as we're doing that, we imagine that as we're breathing, we leave where we are right now, and we sort of feel like we're in a moment of twilight. So that beautiful time where the blue is getting darker, it's getting quieter. We can start to, as we start to feel and hear into the sounds of nature. So we're kind of noticing now we're being taken out into nature. And so as we're being taken out into nature, we can smell and feel the earth beneath our feet. And we also feel that reference point of the earth. But we're also seeing or feeling that the colors of the night, that the feeling of night is kind of opening up to us, that beautiful mystical time of twilight. And that as we start to feel that, and we hear it, and however like our imaginal mind goes, we're feeling and breathing into the pulse of the evening. And so what comes up in the evening, if it were summer, would be like, little fireflies and the subtleties, the crickets. And then we also start to imagine that there are trees around us. And then as we imagine and feel into it, and we can breathe into the trees, the fragrance of the trees, we start to look up and we notice that there is a beautiful ray of light, or little rays of light coming through the leaves, coming between the branches, the shadow and the light. And then as we look up, we start to notice the moon. And so as you start to notice the moon, remember what we felt like when we talked about that moment when we were children and we first gazed upon the moon. So we see the moon rising and we feel the power of the moon coming up into the sky. And just notice how we feel about that beautiful ray coming towards us. And we start to let it bathe us. And we start to let it, in a way, reweave us into the sacred feminine like a grandmother would if she sat down and told us a story. And so we start to connect with that notion of being connected to the moon being a reference point, the moon being a path to remember where we come from, and a guide to where we intuitively wish to move forward. So it is a gentle, intuitive, mystical, cellular but celestial kind of beacon for us. And so we just start to breathe that and attune that once again to our inner self. And imagine now that moon that is above us, we start to breathe in and feel, where does that moon point want to rest within us for today? Where does it feel like if we put our hands on our bodies, we would feel that moon point within us? Would it be in our pelvic area? Would it be in our heart? Would it be in our throat? Would it authenticate that relationship to our sacred voice, our story, not only our story of today, but our story of, again, where we come from and where we're going? Where would that moon point want to dwell within us? And just feel into that. And then gently let everything disappear, that beautiful dark energy that comes with the evening, the twilight, and then into the evening, the experience of seeing, witnessing, feeling, imagining the moon, the trees as the relationship to the earth and the sky, and then breathing back into our breath and that moon point within us. And just dedicate that every day we're going to check in with that moon point, and then we're going to feel into what it wants to reveal within us, remind us, tell us a story, help us with our health and well-being, our creative and our emotional understanding. So we set that understanding that so much is going to be available in this relationship with the moon and this moon point. A beautiful, beautiful teacher, a guide. And then gently returning to our breath, and very gently and easily letting our eyes open, maybe opening to our hands first, and then opening to each other, to our summit community. So how did that feel?
Yummy. Oh, so divine. Restful, grounding, at the same time inspiring and opening, like this combination. So it was like a centering quality and then an expansive and a contract. It was interesting. It was really cool.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, and so, very easily, if you felt that moon point.
Yeah, I did.
Then what you can do is just, touch that.
Yeah, right.
Close your eyes, and it's right there. It's our sacred moon, and that may change. But it's kind of a lovely way to feel like then our bodies are engaged with the moon. And our bodies, our physical bodies, are three-dimensional, are multidimensional. And, the inner moon then opens us up to all of that because we're dynamic and we're connected. We're sort of plugged in. So I know we covered a lot of ground, and yet it was scratching the surface. But it's hopefully it'll give everybody a taste to want to then do their own inquiry and start to discover their own sacred inheritance and their practices, and maybe go and look up in terms of our own ethnicity or our own cultural reference point, or one that speaks to us. It might be one that's not in our blood but really speaks to us, or in our if we do yoga and kind of look from that point of view, or whatever it might be, and start to say, I want to lift the lid a little bit and learn about the goddess and the teachings of the moon and the stories and the connections and talk to your family members and all of those things. And it just becomes a beautiful kind of reweaving into, I remember Gloria Steinem once said, we are from a tribe that's lost its memory, as contemporary Western women. And so to really take that on and say, yeah, and not to look at it as being on the outside of a glass door that we can never come in. We are not guests. We are daughters of the earth. We live here. We have these bodies, we bleed and we don't die. We are warriors, but we are love warriors and we are warriors of creation and to make things better. So it's really, really exciting once we kind of get ourselves going.
Super exciting and amazing. And I love for people to know about how to continue with you and learning from you. Is everydaymedicinewoman.com is a great place to check out. Where else would you like to have people?
Thank you. If you come to the website, sign up for our mailing list. There's a lot of material, and I'll be in the process of revamping everything. But please do come in and take a peek and get on the list so you can get updates. If you go on my Facebook page, Everyday Medicine Woman, or on my Instagram is Susan Lipshutz, and I try to put in regular posts, certainly new moons and full moons and different little things that are going on. That can be available, and I hope is a bridge from the esoteric into the practical. Definitely. I am a Capricorn, so that's a goal, however I do that. And then also with a beautiful colleague of mine, a sister who hosts a monthly podcast, and it's called, her platform is moontentco.com. But the monthly podcast is called Moonwise. You can find it on iTunes and just get signed up or subscribe. It's archived on my website as well. But it's a new moon monthly podcast. And so I go deep into the new moon and then the cycle for the month. And it tells a lot of different teachings about the particular things that are going on at that time, where the moon is, where it's cycling through, what are opportunities to do different kind of ceremonial perspective or what's going on at the collective micro macro level. And it's, even if you go through the archives, it'll do a lot of sequential teaching about the moon. So it's a lot of fun. And then also I do in individual sessions with people. I do Skype sessions and all of that, where it can work on a lot of different levels and different opportunities. So stay posted. It's a great honor to always have intentional community together and to be working in collaboration with so many gifted women and teachers like yourself. So I'm so honored that you asked me and thought of me, and I just really honor your work.
Oh, thank you so much, and we are very blessed to have you. And I have to say, everyone, please follow Susan in Facebook and Instagram, and also through all of her different postings with the podcast, because truly it makes these teachings, these wise teachings, these ancient teachings, very palpable and palatable for today, and for what it could mean in your life today, at this moment in time. And they're these beautiful, kind of almost, I would say, like booster shots of energy when I read them, and I get reminded. It's that remembrance when you were talking about too of being reminded of the connection to this part of ourselves that is actually always there, but we've kind of cut ourselves off from. And whenever I'm reading what you're sharing or listening to what you're sharing, it's like, oh, right. And I get to taste a part of myself that was always there that I had disconnected from. So
exactly, and that's the hope. And then we become co-creators because we've got a whole different toolbox or dashboard or whatever we want to call it. So I would say the other thing is let the moon be your muse, right? Mm-hmm. And that we are moon goddesses, and it's just allowing that fullness of our potential to be really expressed in a beautiful, unapologetic, organic way. We just reflect what we are.
Thank you so much, Susan.
Yes, it's such a joy. Thank you.
Blessings.